The first light of dawn crept through the cracks in the shutters, turning the cabin air pale gold. The storm clouds had cleared and the valley below glistened from last night's rain. Ethan hadn't slept at all. He sat by the door, rifle across his knees, listening to the quiet world outside. Clara still rested on the cot, her breathing slow but stronger now. Keller moved around the room softly, packing a few things into a small satchel: bandages, a flask, and the metal piece they had removed from her side, now wrapped tightly in cloth. When Keller looked at Ethan, his face was serious. "They'll be back soon. The shot we fired last night will have drawn more of them." Ethan nodded, tightening the saddle straps on Jasper through the open door. "Then we move now. Milford isn't far if we take the canyon road." Keller handed him the satchel. "Keep this safe. That metal isn't just proof, it's bait. They'll want it back more than they want her." Ethan took it and slid it into his saddlebag. "What about you?" Keller gave a small, tired smile. "Someone has to stay behind to slow them down. I've lived a long life, Ward. You just make sure that woman gets to the train." Ethan didn't argue. He knew Keller was right. He walked over to Clara and knelt beside her. "Time to go," he said softly. She opened her eyes and tried to sit up, wincing a little. "You're not leaving him?" she asked, glancing toward Keller. The older man shook his head. "Don't worry about me, miss. I'll make a fine distraction." Ethan helped her to her feet and wrapped his coat around her shoulders. She leaned on him as they stepped outside into the cool morning air. The world looked calm again, but they both knew danger was never far behind. Keller followed them to the edge of the porch. "Head east till you hit the stream," he said. "Follow it till you see the rail bridge. Milford's on the other side. You'll be safe there if you keep moving." Ethan nodded once. "Thank you for everything." Keller gave a short nod back. "Go, before I change my mind." They mounted Jasper and rode out through the trees. The air smelled fresh after the storm, the grass still wet under the horses' hooves. Clara held on to Ethan's coat for balance, her head resting weakly against his shoulder. They rode in silence, the sun climbing higher with each mile. Every now and then Ethan glanced back, half expecting to see riders coming through the mist. But the forest remained still. When they reached the stream, they followed it, as Keller had said. The path was narrow but smooth, winding between tall pines. Birds sang above them, and for a few brief moments the world seemed peaceful. Clara looked up and whispered, "Do you think we'll really make it?" Ethan looked ahead, eyes steady. "We'll make it. I promise." By mid-morning they saw the steel rail bridge glimmering in the distance. The sound of a far-off train echoed faintly through the hills. Hope stirred in Ethan's chest. But then Jasper stopped suddenly, ears twitching. The horse snorted nervously and backed up a few steps. Ethan's grip tightened on the reins. "What is it, boy?" he whispered. That's when he heard it, the low rumble of hooves behind them. He turned and saw 3 riders breaking through the trees, moving fast. "They had found them again. Hold on!" Ethan shouted, kicking Jasper into a gallop. The horse sprang forward, racing along the stream. Clara clung to him, her face pale but determined. The riders fired, bullets splashing into the water near their feet. Ethan leaned low over Jasper's neck, urging him faster. The bridge drew closer, the ground trembling as the train whistle blew in the distance. He had one chance: cross before the riders reached them. The path narrowed sharply near the bridge, forcing them through a rocky slope. Jasper leapt over fallen branches, hooves striking sparks from stone. Another shot rang out, grazing Ethan's sleeve. He gritted his teeth and kept going. The train whistle screamed again, louder now, echoing through the canyon. The track shook. "Ethan!" Clara cried. "The train's coming!" "I see it," he yelled back. The steam engine burst from around the bend, roaring across the bridge. Smoke poured from its stack and wheels clattered like thunder. They couldn't cross until it passed, but the riders were closing fast behind them. Ethan pulled Jasper sharply to the side, turning into a small grove near the bridge. They slid off the horse and ducked behind a boulder. Clara pressed her hand to her wound, gasping. "They're right there," she whispered. Ethan peeked over the rock. The men dismounted and spread out, rifles ready. He could hear them talking. "They can't cross with the train. They're trapped." Ethan checked his gun, 2 bullets left. He whispered to Clara, "Stay here no matter what happens." She grabbed his arm. "Don't go out there." He gave a faint smile. "You told me not to pull the metal, remember?" "I didn't listen then either." He slipped from behind the rock, moving low through the trees. One of the riders stepped too close and scanning the area. Ethan struck fast, knocking him down and grabbing his rifle. The other two shouted and fired. Bark flew from the trees as bullets tore past. Ethan returned fire, hitting one man's leg. The third ran toward the fallen rider, but Ethan was faster. He tackled him, the two rolling in the dirt. The man swung wildly, but Ethan hit him hard across the jaw, leaving him motionless. When the last shot faded, only the sound of the train remained. The great engine roared by, leaving a trail of smoke that drifted through the trees. Ethan stood breathing hard, dirt and sweat covering his face. Clara crawled out from behind the rock, eyes wide. "You're hurt," she said. He shook his head. "Just tired." They hurried back to Jasper. The train was slowing as it reached the small Milford station across the bridge. They rode fast, crossing the now quiet tracks just as the last car passed. People at the platform turned in surprise as the dusty cowboy and pale woman appeared from the trees. Ethan helped Clara down, leading her toward the ticket booth. The station master looked alarmed. "What in heaven's name happened to her?" he asked. "Long story," Ethan said shortly. "I need a ticket east." "The next train." The man nodded and hurried to prepare it. Clara looked up at him, her eyes tired but soft. "You're not coming with me, are you?" she asked quietly. Ethan looked down, then away. "If I get on that train, they'll follow. They'll put everyone on board at risk. I'll ride the other way and draw them off." She shook her head. "You can't fight them alone." He smiled faintly. "I don't have to fight them. Just keep them busy long enough for you to disappear." The station master handed him the ticket. He pressed it into Clara's hand. "There's a doctor in Silver Creek. He'll help you. Show him that piece Keller wrapped. Tell him what happened." She nodded, tears in her eyes. "I'll never forget you, Ethan." He touched the brim of his hat. "Just promise me one thing. Don't look back till you reach Silver Creek." She nodded again, clutching the ticket tightly. The whistle blew. The train hissed and began to move. Ethan lifted her gently onto the steps. She turned once, meeting his eyes through the steam and noise. Then the train pulled away, carrying her into the morning light. Ethan stood watching until it vanished down the tracks. The valley was quiet again, the only sound the wind through the grass. He felt the weight of the past days settle over him, the fear, the chase, the strange fate that had brought them together. Then he heard hooves again, faint but certain. The riders hadn't given up. He mounted Jasper, checking the rifle slung across his shoulder. "Come on, boy," he murmured. The horse started forward. Ethan turned away from the tracks and rode toward the far hills where the mist still hung low. The sun rose higher behind him, painting the world gold. Far off, a small piece of cloth fluttered from the ground near the station, a bit of the bandage Keller had wrapped around the strange metal shard. The wind caught it, carrying it across the tracks like a quiet memory. By the time the riders reached Milford, there was no trace of the cowboy or the woman, only an empty trail, a fading cloud of dust, and the whisper of hoofbeats disappearing into the morning. Some said later that a rancher saw a man riding east that day, his coat torn, his horse limping but strong. Others said he never stopped riding. But everyone in those parts remembered the story. The cowboy who saved a stranger marked for death, the man who ignored fear and listened to his heart instead. And those who heard it always paused at the same line she had whispered that night in the rain, when her voice shook and his world changed forever. "Please don't pull it," she begged. But he did, and that choice saved her life. The sun was already low by the time Ethan and Clara reached the edge of the valley. The air was cool and the sky glowed orange and pink above the mountains. The smoke from the distant chimney gave Ethan a small spark of hope. He pointed toward it and said softly, "That's Keller's place. Just a few more miles." Clara nodded weakly, her voice barely a whisper. "I can't feel my arm." Her face was pale and sweat rolled down her temples. Ethan's heart tightened as he looked at her. She didn't have much strength left. He guided Jasper carefully through the rough trail. The path twisted between rocks and tall pines. Every sound made him look over his shoulder. The rustle of leaves, the call of a hawk, the snapping of branches. He knew the men from the canyon wouldn't stop hunting them. He kept one hand near his rifle and the other around Clara's waist to keep her steady. As they neared Keller's cabin, smoke from the chimney thickened. The small wooden house stood on a ridge surrounded by tall trees. An old windmill creaked beside it. A figure came into view, an older man with gray hair and a long coat chopping wood near the porch. Ethan called out, "Keller!" The man turned sharply, his axe in hand. When he saw Ethan, his face softened. Well, I'll be damned, he said, lowering the axe. Didn't expect to see you again, Ward. What brings you here? Ethan dismounted quickly and helped Clara down. Trouble, he said simply. Keller's eyes fell on the woman and his face turned serious. She's hurt, Ethan nodded. Badly. She's got something stuck in her side, metal of some kind. She says if we pull it, it might trigger something. Keller frowned deeply and motioned them inside. The cabin smelled of tobacco and old books. Tools and medical supplies hung neatly on the walls. He cleared a table and gestured for Ethan to lay Clara down. She winced as he set her on the wooden surface. Keller grabbed a lamp and leaned close to inspect the wound. She wasn't lying, Keller muttered. That's no wagon scrap. That's part of a device. He reached for his magnifying glass and studied the metal. Looks like an ignition casing. Probably one of those new types of detonators they've been experimenting with. Whoever put this in her didn't want her to live long. Ethan's hands clenched. Can you get it out? Keller hesitated. Maybe, but if I pull wrong, it could set off what's inside. We'll both be blown apart before we know it. Clara stirred, her voice weak. Then leave it, she whispered. I've already caused enough trouble. Ethan looked at her firmly. No, you're not dying here. You made it this far. We'll see it through. Keller sighed. You've always been stubborn, Ward. He pulled on a pair of gloves. All right, but I'll need steady hands, good light, and silence. He looked at Ethan. You hold her still. If she moves even a hair, it could go wrong. Ethan nodded. His heart pounded as Keller brought out his tools. The room grew quiet except for the ticking of an old clock. The lamplight flickered on Keller's face as he worked. His hands moved carefully, slow as if time itself had stopped. Clara's breathing was shallow, her eyes fixed on the ceiling. Ethan held her hand tightly. It's all right, he whispered. You're safe here. Keller worked for several long minutes, sweat dripping down his forehead. He used a small hook to lift the edge of the metal shard. A faint click sounded. Everyone froze. Keller's eyes widened. There's a second trigger, he said softly. It's wired underneath the flesh. Ethan swallowed hard. Can you stop it? Keller didn't answer. He reached for a pair of tiny pliers and gently twisted something beneath the wound. Another click followed, then silence. Keller exhaled slowly. All right. It's disarmed. Now hold her steady. He pulled the shard free in one smooth motion. Clara gasped in pain, tears running down her face. Ethan kept holding her hand, his grip firm. Keller dropped the piece of metal into a bucket of water, where it hissed and sank. The smell of burned oil filled the air. Ethan stared at the strange object. It was shaped like a small cylinder with faint symbols carved along its side. What is that thing? He asked. Keller shook his head. Something dangerous. And expensive. Whoever made it didn't want it found. He cleaned the wound quickly and wrapped it with fresh bandages. She'll live, he said finally. But she needs rest. A few more hours and you'd have lost her. Ethan let out a shaky breath and looked down at Clara. She was asleep now, her face peaceful for the first time since he'd met her. Thank you, Ethan said quietly. Keller nodded but didn't smile. You said people are after her. You weren't exaggerating, were you? Ethan shook his head. They tracked us all the way here. 3 men. They'll come again when they find our trail. Keller walked to the window and looked out at the fading light. Then you'd better be ready. This ridge isn't easy to reach, but once they find it, there's no easy escape. He loaded his old rifle and set it by the door. You get some rest. I'll keep watch for now. Ethan sat beside the bed where Clara slept. Her breathing had steadied, her color slowly returning. He brushed a strand of hair from her forehead. For the first time, she didn't look like someone running from death, just a tired soul who had fought too long. Hours passed. The night grew darker, and the wind outside picked up again. Ethan dozed off in the chair, his rifle leaning against his knee. But deep in his sleep, he heard something faint. Hoofbeats. Slow and distant at first, then closer. He woke instantly, gripping his rifle. Keller, who had been sitting near the fire, looked up. You hear that? Ethan nodded. They're here. They moved quickly, blowing out the lamp and checking the windows. Through the darkness, they saw shadows moving below the ridge, lanterns swaying in the distance. The men had found them, Keller whispered. There's a back way through the woods, but it's steep. You'll have to ride hard. Ethan looked toward Clara, who was still sleeping. She's too weak to travel tonight. Keller loaded his rifle. Then we make our stand here. Ethan nodded. They took positions by the windows as the lanterns drew closer. The men climbed slowly up the ridge, their voices low but clear enough to hear. She's alive. The signal stopped, so they must have pulled it. Ethan's heart pounded, so they knew about the device. They knew Keller had removed it. He aimed his rifle, whispering, "Guess we just confirmed it for them." The first shot came from below, striking the edge of the porch. Keller fired back, his aim sharp despite his age. The gunfire echoed across the ridge. Sparks flew as bullets hit the cabin walls. Ethan ducked and returned fire, hitting one of the men's lanterns, which shattered in a burst of flame. The attackers shouted, retreating behind the trees, but they kept shooting. Keller gritted his teeth. They won't stop till they get her. Ethan's voice was calm but cold. Then we'll give them a reason to regret it. The fight went on for minutes that felt like hours. Finally, the sounds faded. The night grew quiet again, except for the wind and the crackle of the fire. Keller reloaded his gun and checked the door. "They're gone for now," he said. Ethan looked at Clara, who hadn't woken through the chaos. "They'll come again," he said quietly. "We can't stay," Keller nodded. "At first light, you ride east. There's a train station in Milford. Get her there. Tell no one her name, no one your story. Once she's on that train, she'll disappear." Ethan took a deep breath, staring out at the dark forest below. "I'll get her there," he said firmly. "No matter what it takes." He went back to her side and sat quietly, listening to her soft breathing. The night was far from over, but for the first time since this began, he believed they had a chance. Still, he couldn't shake the feeling that the worst was yet to come. The morning light broke slowly through the fog, touching the wet grass and turning the rain into silver sparkles. The storm had passed, but the quiet that followed felt heavy, uneasy. Ethan stepped outside the cabin with his rifle still in hand, scanning the tree line. The men from the night before were gone, or at least they wanted him to think they were. The air was still, too still for his liking. He walked toward the barn, every step careful and light. The ground was soft from the rain, covered in hoofprints. Some were his own, but others were fresh, deeper, and coming from more than one horse. He knelt, running his hand over the mud. 3, maybe 4, he murmured. They had been close. Too close. Inside the barn, Jasper snorted nervously, stamping his hooves. Ethan stroked the horse's neck to calm him. "Easy, boy. We'll be moving soon." He checked the saddlebags, added a few bandages, dried food, and a canteen. He didn't know where they would go yet, but staying here wasn't an option anymore. Back in the cabin, Clara was awake, her face pale but her eyes clearer than before. She tried to sit up but winced from the pain. "They came, didn't they?" she asked in a weak voice. Ethan nodded. "Yeah, 3 men. I scared them off for now, but they'll be back." He walked to the window, peering through the curtain. "We have to leave before they return." Clara looked down, one hand resting on the blanket covering her wound. "You don't know what you're getting into," she said quietly. "They're not ordinary men. They're part of something bigger." Ethan turned toward her. "Then you better start explaining, ma'am, because I need to know who's after you and why they put that metal thing in your side." She looked at him for a long moment before answering. "I worked for a company in the next county, Richmond and Coal Trading. They moved goods between towns, but some of those goods weren't what they seemed. Hidden inside the crates were small devices, metal pieces that held powder and wires. I didn't understand what they were until I saw one explode during testing. It wasn't for mining or building. It was for destroying." Ethan frowned deeply. "Explosives?" She nodded slowly. "They made them small, easy to hide. They used people like me to transport them without knowing. When I found out, I took one of their ledgers and ran. They caught me before I got far. One of them pushed me into the wagon wheel, and that piece, it went in." Her voice shook. "They said if anyone tried to help me and pulled it out, it would set off what was left inside." Ethan's blood ran cold. He looked again at the piece of metal sticking out of her side. No wonder she begged him not to pull it. If she was right, it wasn't just a shard, it was part of something meant to kill. He paced the room, thinking fast. "Then we need someone who knows how to handle this safely. There's an old army medic who lives north of here, past the canyon. Name's Dr. Keller. He worked with munitions once. If anyone can get that thing out without setting it off, it's him." Clara tried to protest. "It's too dangerous. You should leave me here and go. They'll come after you if you take me." Ethan shook his head firmly. "I already made my choice when I carried you out of that ditch. I'm not backing down now." She looked at him with a kind of fragile trust. tears gathering in her eyes. Why would you risk your life for someone you don't even know? He paused, meeting her gaze. Because once someone did the same for me, he said quietly, and I never got to pay it back. He packed what little they could carry. He wrapped her wound carefully with fresh cloth, made a sling out of an old blanket, and helped her outside. She gasped when the sunlight hit her face, squinting at the open land ahead. Her legs trembled, but Ethan held her steady. Lean on me, he said softly. We'll go slow. He lifted her onto Jasper, climbing up behind her to keep her balanced. The morning was cool, the fog thinning as they rode north. The sound of hooves echoed softly against the empty land. Clara leaned weakly against him, her breathing shallow but steady. Every few minutes, Ethan checked over his shoulder, scanning the horizon. By noon, they reached the foothills. The path wound through rocky slopes and dry shrubs far from the main road. The air smelled of pine and damp soil. They stopped near a stream to rest. Ethan helped Clara drink from his canteen, then splashed some water on his face. We're halfway there, he said. Keller's place should be near the ridge. Clara's eyes followed the flow of the stream. You shouldn't have done this, she murmured. They'll track you. They always do. Ethan smiled faintly. Let them try. The calm didn't last. As they prepared to move again, Ethan heard a sound in the distance, a low hum, then the crack of a branch. He froze, listening. There it was again, hooves, more than one horse. He quickly helped Clara back onto Jasper. We need to move, now. They rode fast along the narrow trail, the sound of pursuit growing behind them. Ethan looked back and saw figures appearing through the trees, 3 riders dressed in dark coats moving fast. Hold on, he shouted. Jasper charged forward, his hooves kicking up mud and stones. The canyon edge came into view ahead, its slope steep and dangerous. Ethan turned the horse sharply toward a narrow pass he remembered from years ago. Bullets suddenly cracked through the air, whizzing past. Clara screamed softly, gripping his arm. They're shooting! I see them, Ethan said through gritted teeth. He guided Jasper between 2 large boulders, ducking low as another shot rang out. Sparks flew from a rock beside him. He kept riding, every muscle tense. The trail twisted downward, leading into a dry riverbed where the sound of hooves echoed loud and hollow. One of the riders was gaining on them. Ethan looked back, aimed his rifle with one hand, and fired a warning shot. The man pulled his horse aside, shouting to the others. That gave Ethan a few seconds. He pushed Jasper harder, sweat glistening on the horse's neck. When they finally reached a cluster of trees near the canyon floor, Ethan pulled the horse to a stop behind the cover of rocks. He could hear the men searching nearby, their voices muffled. Spread out. They can't be far. Ethan helped Clara off the horse and crouched behind the rocks with her. She was trembling, tears running down her cheeks. They won't stop, she whispered. They'll kill you just like they tried to kill me. He wiped the sweat from his brow, eyes scanning the shadows. Then we'll make sure they don't get the chance. He pulled a small mirror from his pocket and angled it to see around the rock. The riders were close now, moving slowly through the trees, rifles ready. Ethan's heartbeat thudded in his chest. He had only a few bullets left. If they found them, there'd be no easy way out. Clara clutched his sleeve. Please don't fight them. Just go, leave me. They want me, not you. He looked at her, his jaw tight. No, they chose the wrong cowboy to threaten. The footsteps drew closer. One of the men stopped just a few feet away from their hiding spot. Ethan could see the shadow of his boots. He waited, breath held. The man turned slightly, his gun lowering. Ethan saw his chance. He leaped from behind the rock, hitting the man square in the chest. They fell hard, rolling in the dirt. Ethan grabbed the rifle and struck the man across the face, knocking him out. The other 2 shouted and fired blindly toward the rocks. Ethan ducked behind a tree, returning fire. The shots echoed through the canyon. Jasper neighed loudly, startled. Clara pressed her hands over her ears, shaking. After a tense few moments, silence fell again. The 2 men were gone, retreating into the trees. Maybe they thought there were more people waiting in ambush. Ethan didn't wait to find out. He hurried back to Clara, helping her onto the horse again. We're not safe yet, he said. We'll reach Keller before nightfall. I promise. They rode again, the wind pushing through the trees and the sun slowly sinking behind the ridge. Clara leaned weakly against him, whispering, Why are you still helping me? He looked ahead at the golden horizon and said quietly, Because if I don't, nobody will. The canyon opened up into a wide valley, and far in the distance, Ethan could see the faint smoke of a chimney, Keller's cabin. He felt a spark of hope rise in his chest. Maybe, just maybe, they would make it before the sun disappeared. But deep down, he knew the danger wasn't over yet. Someone had gone through a lot of trouble to make sure Clara Holt didn't live to tell her story, and he had just made himself part of that story. The rain came harder through the night. Ethan stayed awake beside the woman, listening to every sound outside the cabin. The roof rattled under the downpour, and the wind howled through the cracks in the walls. The fire had burned down to red coals, but he didn't move from her side. He could see how weak she had become. Every breath she took came with a small sound of pain. Her skin had turned pale, and the wound on her side still leaked dark blood around the edges of the metal piece. He didn't know how much longer she could hold on. He dipped a cloth in warm water and pressed it gently around the wound, careful not to touch the shard. When he did, she stirred, her eyes opening just a little. She looked confused at first, not sure where she was. Then her eyes found his face, and she whispered, "You stayed." Ethan nodded. "You were half dead when I found you. I couldn't just leave you out there." He tried to smile, but it didn't reach his eyes. "You're safe now. I've got you under a roof." Her lips trembled. "Safe?" she said faintly. "No one is safe. Not when they want you gone." He leaned closer, trying to understand her words. "Who wants you gone? Tell me." She swallowed hard, eyes darting toward the window as if she expected someone to burst through the door. "I worked for them," she whispered. "They trusted me, until I saw what they were doing. Then they made sure I wouldn't speak." Ethan frowned. "Who's they?" She hesitated, shaking her head. "Doesn't matter now. If they find me, it's over. For both of us." He looked down at the strange metal piece still buried in her side. The thought of it made his stomach twist. It didn't look like wagon metal or anything made for farming. It was smooth and polished with faint markings along its edge. Whoever had done this knew what they were doing. "That thing in you," he said softly. "You said not to pull it. Why is it poison? A trap?" Her eyes filled with tears. "Just promise me you won't," she whispered. "Please." Ethan sighed and nodded slowly. "All right, I won't, but I need to get you to a doctor." "You can't last long like this." She shook her head weakly. "The doctor in town? He works for them too." That stopped him. He didn't know who them was, but he could see she believed it. She wasn't making this up. There was terror in her eyes every time she spoke of them. He leaned back and rubbed his face. "Then we'll figure something else out," he muttered. "But you're not dying here. Not if I can help it." He got up, checked the door again, and peered outside. The rain had slowed, but the night was still dark and heavy. He thought he saw movement far beyond the trees. A flicker of light, maybe a lantern. He blinked and looked again, but it was gone. He told himself it was just his mind playing tricks, but the feeling of unease stayed with him. He went back inside, closed the bolt, and sat again near her. She had fallen asleep this time, her breathing shallow but steady. Ethan leaned his head back against the wall. He was tired, but he couldn't let himself sleep. He needed to be ready in case someone really was out there. Hours passed slowly. The rain eased and silence returned to the land. The firelight threw soft shadows across the room. Finally, near dawn, exhaustion won, and Ethan's eyes closed for a moment. He woke to the sound of Jasper's loud snort outside. The horse was restless, stomping the ground. Ethan grabbed his rifle and moved to the window, peering out. The fog hung low across the ground, making it hard to see. Then he caught sight of something, a faint light moving between the trees again. Someone was out there, walking slow, carrying a lantern. He tensed. The woman was right. They weren't alone. He went back to her side and gently shook her shoulder. "Clara," he whispered. "Wake up." Her eyes opened, weak but aware. "What is it?" she asked quietly. "Someone's out there," he said.
"Do you know who?"
Her face drained of what little color it had left. "They found me," she whispered. "You have to leave. They'll kill you if you stay." Ethan shook his head firmly. "Not happening. You're under my roof now. I don't abandon people." He stood and walked to the window again, lifting the curtain just enough to see. The light was closer now. 2 figures. Maybe 3. They were moving carefully, staying low. He could tell from the way they walked. They were trained, not just travelers. His jaw tightened. He loaded his rifle and moved quietly to the door. Clara's voice came from behind him, trembling. "Please, don't fight them. They'll burn it all. They did before." He glanced back at her. "Then we'll be ready this time." He turned down the lamp until the room was dark and crouched near the window. The rain had almost stopped now, leaving only the sound of dripping water from the roof. Through the fog, he could see shapes moving toward the barn. They were checking everything, one step at a time. Whoever they were, they knew how to hunt. Ethan waited, breathing slow. His heart pounded in his chest, but he stayed still. Then one of them came close enough for him to see clearly. A man in a long coat carrying a small lantern. He looked around carefully, then signaled to someone behind him. Ethan noticed something strange. The man wore no badge, no rancher's gear, nothing that made sense out here. These weren't locals. They were looking for her. He turned back to Clara, whispering, "If they get close, I'll lead them away. You stay quiet. Don't move, no matter what happens." She reached for his arm, weakly gripping it. "You shouldn't have helped me," she said softly. "Now you're marked too." He looked down at her and forced a small smile. "Maybe, but I'd rather die doing what's right than live knowing I left someone to bleed alone." Then he slipped out the back door, closing it silently behind him. The ground was wet and the air was cold against his face. He moved through the fog toward the corral, staying low. He could see their lantern light now near the barn. 2 men were searching inside, while one stood guard outside, holding what looked like a revolver. Ethan crouched behind the fence and watched. He didn't want to fight, but he needed to draw them away. He reached into his pocket, pulled out a small rock, and tossed it toward the far side of the barn. The rock hit the wood with a sharp crack. The guard turned immediately. "You hear that?" the man said. One of the others came out. "Check it," he ordered. The guard walked off into the fog, leaving a gap between them. Ethan waited for the right moment, then moved fast. He grabbed a loose board from the corral and threw it hard against the barn wall on the other side. Both men turned toward the sound. That was his chance. He sprinted silently across the field, back toward the cabin. His boots splashed through the wet grass. He reached the door, slipped inside, and bolted it again. Clara was sitting up slightly, her eyes wide with fear. "You shouldn't have come back," she whispered. Ethan set his rifle down for a moment and caught his breath. "They're still out there," he said. "But they're looking in the wrong place for now." She was trembling badly now. He knelt beside her again, pressing his hand gently on her shoulder. "We'll get through this," he said quietly. "You just hold on. When the sun rises, we'll ride out. I'll find somewhere safe." She looked up at him, her eyes glassy with tears. "You don't understand," she whispered. "There's no safe place anymore." Ethan didn't answer. He just sat beside her, staring into the dying fire, feeling the weight of her words settle heavy on his heart. He didn't know who these men were or what secret she carried, but he knew one thing for sure. He was part of it now. Outside, the sound of footsteps moved away, fading slowly into the distance. But he knew they'd be back. The storm was over and the real danger was just beginning. The sun was low on the horizon, painting the sky in colors of gold and orange. The dusty road stretched far and empty, the wind carrying a soft whistle through the tall dry grass. Ethan Ward rode slowly, the reins loose in his hand, his hat pulled low to shield his eyes from the light. He had spent the day trading cattle feed in town and was on his way home, hoping to reach his ranch before night covered the plains. The evening was calm, quiet enough that he could hear the rhythmic breathing of his horse, Jasper. It was one of those peaceful moments that made him feel alive, until he saw something lying near the trail ahead. At first, Ethan thought it was just an old wagon. The front wheel was broken, and one side was tilted into the ditch. But as he drew closer, he saw a figure sitting beside it. A woman. She wasn't moving much, just staring down at the ground with one hand pressed tightly against her side. Her clothes were torn and dusty, her hair tangled from the wind. Something about the scene made him pull the reins. Jasper snorted, uneasy. Ethan stepped down carefully and tied the horse to a low branch. He called out, trying to sound gentle. "Ma'am, you all right there?" The woman lifted her head, startled. Her eyes were wide, and there was fear in them. Not the kind that came from strangers, but the kind that came from something much worse. Her lips trembled as she whispered, "Please, don't come closer." He froze. The sound of her voice wasn't angry, it was desperate. Ethan could see her hand shaking as she held her side. Blood darkened the fabric of her dress. He took a cautious step forward anyway. "You're hurt," he said softly. "Let me help you." She tried to shake her head, but the movement made her wince. "No, please," she murmured, voice thin as paper. "Don't pull it." Ethan stopped where he was, his eyes following where her hand rested. There was a piece of metal lodged in her side, long and jagged, glinting in the fading sunlight. It looked like part of the wagon had broken off during some kind of accident. He knelt beside her, ignoring her weak protest. "You need help right now," he said. "If that thing stays inside, you could bleed out before morning." Tears rolled down her dusty cheeks as she whispered again, "Please." "Don't pull it." Her words made him pause. He had seen wounds before, cattle horns, barbed wire, even bullet grazes, but he had never seen fear like this. It wasn't just pain she was afraid of. Something deeper made her voice tremble that way. He slowly unbuckled his satchel and pulled out a small cloth. "All right," he said quietly, "I won't touch it yet, but I need to stop the bleeding." He tore part of the cloth and pressed it gently around the metal shard, careful not to move it. She gasped from the pressure but didn't resist. Up close, he could see how pale she was. The wagon wheel beside them had marks of a struggle, scratches, boot prints, and something that looked like burned wood. This wasn't just an accident. He could feel it. "What happened here?" Ethan asked, trying to keep his voice steady. The woman didn't answer at first. Her breathing came fast and shallow. Finally, she whispered, "They came after me, took everything. I tried to hide. The wagon tipped. That's when it went in." "Who came after you?" he asked, but her eyes drifted shut, too weak to respond. Ethan looked around. The road was empty, but his gut told him whoever hurt her might not be far. He needed to get her away from here. He wiped his hands on his pants and tightened the cloth around her wound to keep the blood from flowing. Then, as gently as he could, he lifted her into his arms. She was lighter than he expected, fragile and trembling even in her sleep. "You'll be all right," he muttered under his breath. "Just hold on," Jasper whinnied as he brought her to the horse. Ethan shifted her onto the saddle in front of him, making sure she leaned safely against his chest. The road back to his ranch was long, but it was the only place he had supplies and shelter. He mounted up, one arm around her, and urged Jasper forward. The sky darkened fast. The last bit of sunlight vanished behind the hills, and the cold wind swept across the open land. The sound of hooves echoed against the empty plain. Every few minutes, Ethan glanced back. The horizon was empty, but he couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. He tightened his grip on the reins and kept going. The woman stirred once, whispering something he couldn't quite catch. He leaned down and asked softly, "What's your name?" She took a shaky breath. "Clara," she said weakly. "Clara Holt." Her voice cracked when she added, "They think I'm dead." Then her eyes closed again. Ethan's jaw tightened. Whoever they were, they had left her to die out here. He rode faster, his mind racing between questions he couldn't yet ask. What was she running from? Why did she warn him not to pull the metal out? And who would want to harm a woman like her? The trail narrowed as they reached the ridgeline. Below them, the valley spread wide, shadows of trees moving with the wind. The air smelled like rain. Lightning flickered far in the distance, and thunder rolled a few seconds later. A storm was coming. He urged Jasper faster, whispering words of encouragement to the horse. "Just a bit more, boy. Hold steady." By the time they reached the small wooden gate that marked his land, the first drops had started to fall. Ethan dismounted quickly and lifted Clara again, her head resting against his shoulder. She was burning with fever now, her breathing uneven. He kicked the door open and carried her inside. The cabin was warm, lit only by the faint glow of the lantern on the table. He laid her down carefully, his hands shaking slightly as he saw how much blood had soaked through the cloth. He grabbed another bandage from the shelf, cleaned what he could, and tried to ease her pain. She opened her eyes once more, weak but aware. "You should have left me," she said softly. Ethan looked her straight in the eye. "I don't leave people to die on the road." "Not out here," she blinked, tears forming again. "If you pull it," she whispered, "you'll die too." The words hit him harder than he expected. He frowned. "What are you talking about?" But she was slipping away again, too weak to explain. Her hand fell from his arm and her breathing slowed. Ethan sat there, staring at the strange metal sticking from her side. It wasn't rusted like wagon scrap. It was smooth and dark, almost like something forged differently, something not made for a wagon at all. He reached out a finger and touched the edge. It was cold, even though her skin burned with fever. His instincts screamed at him to leave it alone, but curiosity tugged at him. He wanted to know what it was and what kind of danger it carried. Still, her warning echoed in his head, "Please, don't pull it." Outside, thunder cracked again, shaking the windows. Ethan stood, went to the door, and bolted it shut. He checked his rifle by the wall, then returned to her side. He covered her with a blanket, sat beside her, and waited. The wind howled outside, and the lantern flickered, throwing shadows across the room. Every sound felt louder: the ticking clock, the rain on the roof, the faint sound of horses in the far distance. Were they real or just in his mind? Ethan didn't know yet. He only knew one thing. Whatever had happened to Clara Holt, it wasn't over. And whatever that piece of metal was, it carried a secret that chilled him to the bone. He looked at her one more time and whispered, "You're safe now. I promise." But even as he said it, he wasn't sure it was true.